Welcome back to the Conquest of Happiness. In today's lecture on video, we're going to be covering what I have renamed as selling out and not coming out as who you are, which Bertrand Russell calls fear of public opinion, which is the last chapter in the section on causes of unhappiness. So selling out and not coming out as who you are. So basically he's saying being a fear-driven slave to what others want you to be or expect you to be is a common road to unhappiness, that we can't lead a happy life without being true to ourselves, more or less. So this is a getting entrapped or entangled by an inauthentic life, which cannot bring us true inner contentment. It might look on the surface like we're living a great life, but if we're not staying true to ourselves, we don't feel it. We're not invested in it. We're not emotionally present to the life that we're leading. Fear of public opinion might be translated as fear of disapproval, fear of being perceived negatively by others. And any fear, he muses, is oppressive and stunts growth. So living out of fear, generally, we want to avoid and try to resolve. But particularly, he thinks that fear of disapproval is really going to inhibit our potentials for claiming that unalienable right that lets us pursue freely happiness that we as Americans have in our Declaration of Independence. He feels like we need to emerge out of our initial conditioning and the set of conditions that we were given about how to be in this world and who to become, emerge unembittered and with unimpaired energy, which is quite a feat, because for a lot of people, their initial circumstances present a major obstacle to becoming who they really are because of certain oppressive values or strict expectations or ideals that are in vogue in line with community standards, right, that don't really fit one's disposition, proclivities, personality, through which one is assigned to become rather than discovering what it is I want to become. So selling out to fear of disapproval really doesn't allow me to own or claim or choose the life that I want to live. It is consigning oneself to how others want me to live, not becoming a true adult in that sense. So it's important, he would say, that we fight conformity, that we fight oppressive social norms, mass opinions, what others want you to be or think you ought to be, especially tyrannies of ignorance, oppression, oppressive ideologies, rather, strict mores, and lifestyles that are imposed that aren't life-affirming and life-giving, especially to the individual embedded in them. We get the true versus false self from object relations theorist Daniel Winnicott in 1960. That's kind of a nice reference. What Bertrand Russell is saying is that to be happy, we need to find and cultivate our true selves and risk courageously leaving behind the false self. He talks about at length how unsupportive environments, we might add invalidating environments that don't favor or foster one's natural dispositions, talents, nature, are really counterproductive to the quest for happiness and can really have a destructive influence on the emerging self, especially when internalized, right? Even when you're removed from those initially unsupportive, invalidating environments, you sort of carry it with you in the way that you perceive yourself and go about life. The task for people embedded in such unsupportive environments is to emerge from them, not necessarily abandon them, but to find themselves and have the courage to withstand judgment in becoming more of themselves. So his antidote would be that we should find a right fit in terms of, he thinks hanging out with people of like mind is really conducive to our flourishing and to sort of find our tribe, find people who have similar values to us, who we jive with, who draw us naturally out of ourselves, is really useful in the pursuit of happiness. And so I might suggest like really getting curious about and investigating in your life, what and who drains you versus augments you, what and who takes your energy and what contributes to your energy, what tears you down and what builds you up, what supports you and what thwarts you, and to just get an inner sense of that spectrum, to align yourself with that which is on the positive side of that spectrum as much as you can. This life is short. Why stay, in environments if you don't have to, that are working against you? And he suggests that we don't adjust to culture's lifestyles or expectations that are oppressive, that are ruinously unimaginative, alienating, stifling, degrading. I just saw a really great film called A Hidden Life that came out, I think, in late 2019 that demonstrates this point. Somebody in a rural Austrian village opposes the incoming and Nazi regime that is gaining ascendancy in the collective German mind and having a sway and stranglehold over his community. And he, from his own inner conviction, wants to resist his duties that are assigned to him to fight on behalf of the Third Reich, and gets into a lot of trouble as a result of his resistance. It's a very moving portrait of resisting the inauthentic life, and in this example, the risks involved in that, most of us won't, in risking our authentic self, be in such trying circumstances. But how moving of a portrait of going with authenticity and refusing to live a false life, following the convictions that one has within oneself. He says, that you should resist conforming to that which you don't believe in, and find your own truth, risk your own truth. He does, say you don't need to be intentionally eccentric by any means. That's not the point. Maybe he's fearing that he's promoting something ridiculous here. But that what he's saying is he wants people to be natural, to follow their more or less spontaneous tastes, what is naturally appealing to them, as so far as those tastes aren't definitely antisocial. Or we might say, following your undisciplined cravings is probably not a good road to happiness, but following your own sense of art and beauty and vocation and calling and purpose is preferable to just patterning oneself after inherited values without personally having any involvement with them. I want to deviate from the text for a couple minutes to share an example that came to mind as I was reading it, that comes from a modern day film, a film that was made in the 80s called Dead Poets Society. This is a fictional character in the film. This is a film who, one of the main leads is Robin Williams, who plays a really provocative, quirky poetry professor at an all-boys prep school. The character is Neil Perry, and in the film we follow all these different boys on their journey of really awakening as a result of the teachings of this eccentric poetry philosopher. Neil Perry, under the influence of this authentic model of living true to his own inclinations and being really enthusiastic about life and enthusiastic about the art of poetry, has sort of a conducive effect on Neil, whose family, particularly his father, wants him to become a doctor, and is sort of grooming him to adopt this traditional profession, probably to offer honor and dignity to the family or something like that. Well, Neil Perry, in finding his authentic self, is really drawn to the theater, and in the course of the film gets a lead in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and his father resists it, ends up coming to the play, and takes Neil out of the production and tells him he is withdrawing him from the academy that he's enrolled at. And Neil is so devastated, and I think still so young and feeling so powerless in the face of such enormous odds, ends up killing himself in the film. This is something that obviously is a tragic end to not feeling able to live a life that one owns, and it is an example of a trend toward authenticity that is that should be nurtured, and the oppressive forces that we often have working against us in becoming who we are. I think it's useful to add that Nietzsche puts forth a radical pathway out of what Bertrand Russell is conveying as selling out to a false life, and that is become who you are. I think I keep referencing that along the way. Become who you are is a really nice injunction, and it's been such a tried and true idea for me as a psychotherapist and person that I named my psychotherapy practice after it, become who you are. It is an aphoristic truth of Nietzsche's that he puts into the character Zarathustra in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, who proclaims it to the world. And of course, it means a lot of things. It's an aphorism. It's the succinct, short, pithy truth, and it's said emphatically, like Nietzsche enjoys. And Nietzsche loves exclamation marks in his philosophical works. You find a ton of them. But of course, to unpack this takes volumes. Suffice it to say that become who you are is a bold nudge that helps us move out of just being complacent with a fixed identity and just sort of living out values that are a part of our cultural inheritance, and instead creating from one's own soul, from one's own direct engagement with life, instead of just patterning ourselves after conditioning. That our ultimate value is to create ourselves, to create our life, rather than merely become what he calls sheep, or patterning ourselves after what he calls herd mentality. In a work on Nietzsche by Daniel Kame, he said that this can be ignited by measures we take, often painful, patient, multi-stage measures, to increase freedom and to instigate movement toward fulfillment. Nicely described as a condition in which nothing is left to be desired. So this is one of those external pathways to happiness where we're looking into our heart's deepest desires and actually trying to actualize them and fulfill them in the world, rather than inhibiting those desires or suppressing them or selling out to adopted desires that aren't in resonance with our own true instincts and desires. As a counterpoint to Neil Perry, I want to bring to our discussion a fictional character that, rather than have a tragic end, has actually a resolution and sets herself up on the path toward authenticity in a film that most people are familiar with. It's one of the top grossing films of all time. I'm referencing James Cameron's 1997 Titanic, and the fictional character that I want to examine for a moment is Rose DeWitt Bukater, who becomes Rose Dawson in the film, a self-appointed name to kind of codify her transformation that allows her to overcome in a really radical way, right, in a very dramatic way, her fate as living inauthentically. So Rose, we see through this heroic, symbolic figure of Jack Dawson, is able to find that right environment, find that right fit, and through his way of being, his spirit, his lifestyle, his community, is able to express herself in a different way, find resonance, find a sense of wanting to live again, of life, of zest, of vitality, and chooses that life and gives up a lot to choose it. So Rose ends up, of course, through this dramatic plot twist of being on a sinking ship in the middle of the Atlantic, she ends up choosing a new emergent life, a new possibility for herself that has much greater potential for resonance with her authentic nature than does the life that she was born into. Ends up choosing that very courageously, renouncing her old life, and aligning herself with a path that resonates with the spirit of Jack Dawson, who ends up dying, but he's a symbol anyway, of her transformation. And she's already transformed even in a few days, and is set on this more authentic path. Lastly, when we free ourselves of the fear of public opinion or disapproval and live a life that's more closely aligned with who we really are, we develop a freedom of spirit in which true happiness consists. For it's essential to happiness that our way of life should spring from our deep impulses and disposition, not from the accidental tastes we picked up from our upbringing or our immediate surrounding culture. So stay tuned, everyone, for our next section, which directly addresses ways that we can source happiness, having more or less cleared out sources of unhappiness.